Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
John, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, thank you. And I got to tell you, I think I'm doing a lot better than a lot of workers around the world because for whatever reason, it seems to be just a lot of strife, a lot of division, a lot of just turmoil, if that's the right word, between the world's workers and management. You take a look around the world and it seems there's all kinds of strikes, from a railway strike in Sri Lanka, boy, that was easy for me to say, to doctors at the NHS over in the UK on strike. And here we have locally, or at least locally in the United States, some very high-profile strikes with the Writers Guild out in Hollywood, and increasingly with the UAW here in the United States, really threatening to put a real crippling blow to U.S. automobile manufacturing.
Yeah, this has been, we heard about UPS for a while. That would have been pretty problematic if that had gone through that strike. Yellow, the transportation company that went under, had, union strikes previously and led to inflated budgets and what have you. But it seems like there's more of it happening of late. And you're right, talking about just kind of angst and strife and what have you, managers versus employees. And it seems like when times get tougher, just broadly in general, and by that, people's budgets starting to shrink a little bit, you start to get more, not just in, union striking, but I think you start to get a lot more friction, and it seems like that's a lot of what we're seeing right now.
Well, particularly with a couple of the big strikes here in the United States, I mean, the Writers Guild and then also the UAW. What's frustrating for me is, listen, hey, I'm all for people want to be unionized and they want to try to better their lot in life and have some collective bargaining agreements. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
Nor should anyone. They should be a factory or a company should be able to vote to unionize if they want. But however, they also need to understand basic economics and how the way things really work, and whether or not they're bargaining from a position of true strength or a position of weakness.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things, when I take a look at the North American and more specifically the U.S. automobile market, I'm not sure the U.S. automobile market is as healthy as maybe the UAW thinks it is.
No, we've even, and you got to take the source with a grain of salt on who's saying it, but the leaders of these auto companies are saying some of these demands, we will go under if these are all met.
Well, and then, the thing is, the administration, at least the president, said recently that record profits need to be shared and all that stuff. Well, first things first. Okay, GM did, I think, the trailing 12 months did have all-time high earnings. However, this is the newly reformed GM. We only have data going back to 2009. I guess I could have pulled it out from elsewhere. But that's only telling part of the story. Of course, that money is supposed to go over to shareholders, and there's supposed to be money left for R&D and investing back in the company, all that stuff. That's what's left over. However, on sales of close to sales last year of close to $170 billion, GM netted out about 10 to 11.
Yeah.
And when you take a look at that, what is that? An operating profit margin 6-7%, which really isn't all that great.
No.
It's okay. It's a heavy industry. I mean,
it's a tough
okay.
industry to have big margins.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think Ford actually lost money, and then Stellantis, which we know here is Chrysler, I think they had maybe 10% operating profit margin. So these companies as a whole, yeah, they've made money in aggregate, but they're not making so much money on a relative basis that there's just bushels of it to be thrown around at everyone.
It's not a tech company with 40, 50, 80% margins. And it's always been that way. I mean, it's a tough industry to generate massive margins in, and that's where you start. Margins are where you start to get that wiggle room. You can make as much money revenue. You can bring in as much money as you want. A lot of companies bring in tons of money and lose money.
Well, that's
net out losing money.
You're absolutely right. That is the difference between revenue and income.
Yeah.
It's great to have all that revenue, but if you're not making any money, netting out anything, it means nothing. And so when I take a look at the future of the North American automobile industry, and this is the point of the program, Sam, where I'm going to throw out all my caveats, Anything that we say here at Trading Perspectives does not necessarily reflect the views of our company, Oakworth Capital Bank as a whole, or any of its shareholders, members of the board of directors, other members of management, all that good stuff. Nor are we active buyers or sellers of the companies that we're about to mention, and nor do we make a mark in any of them. Anything we say here on the show should not be considered an offer to buy or sell investment securities or services, and anything you do, any decisions that you make after listening to us, gee whiz, I sound like a lawyer, you do so at your own peril. All right, with that being said, when I take a look at everything that's going on, there's a reason why Ford is trading in the teens. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why GM and Ford combined have a market capitalization of less than $100 billion. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for it. There's a reason why the PE multiples on these things are less than 10.
Because there's risks.
Well, there's risk and there's not any growth.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about it is the North American automobile industry is a fully mature market. Mm-hmm. Fully mature. You know, it's we have the number of cars that we have, or vehicles per 1,000 people. We're not going to see a ramp up from here. And as a result, all the automobile manufacturers are doing here is stealing market share from one another. When you take a look at the market share that the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler had, even at the start of this decade, compared to where it is now, it's embarrassing just how poorly the big three have really performed on a relative basis. And then to go back and try to hit them up for 28, 30% sort of type pay increases, 32 hours, I mean, just all of this stuff, it's just kind of like going, I'm not sure if the UAW is seeing the same numbers I'm seeing. We're reading the same tea leaves. I think all they're focused on is that absolute income number, not realizing a lot of people expect to get paid out of that.
Yeah, and it's, again, it's not even just it's auto workers or auto companies. I mean, airlines, we're seeing it. We've seen strikes with both flight attendants and some pilots in different organizations. I mean, Yellow, we already mentioned trucking companies.
Yep.
A lot of these companies, airlines is a very tough business to make a lot of money.
Yes.
I mean, it's highly capital intensive. You need highly paid employees to
737s aren't cheap.
No, and you need very talented people to work them. You can't.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. But again, I think it just goes back to general friction. I don't think we're near the end of seeing companies striking because, almost everybody's budget has gotten tighter. That's just what inflation does. It's hard for this cumulative inflation we've had for a better part of a couple years now to not start for people to feel the effects, and it creates that kind of tension. It creates that strife, and that's, I just think, what we're seeing. And I think it's until inflation actually essentially stops, I don't think we're near the end of that friction between the payer and the payee.
Without a doubt, there's always been that friction. However, when the tide is rising, generally it lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And right now the tide's not really rising, and particularly with what Washington wants to do in terms of electronic vehicles, again focusing on the automobile industry, the amount of money that, I'm just going to say Detroit is going to have to, spend in order to retool factories, get the research and development up there, and just really get to where the White House wants them to be. That's going to eat into a lot of whatever profitability that there is. And the thing about it that really stinks for these guys is the big three is woefully behind on electronic vehicles. And if you take a look at that, and I forget the source where it was, but I read it this morning, out of the top 15 EV manufacturers globally, big three is not in any of them.
Yeah.
And so that's where the industry is going. Big three is woefully behind, and it's going to present a lot of problems.
And that's been, the difference between Tesla and those is, Tesla is whether you believe it or not, the investment story being sold behind it is extremely high margins.
Yes.
It's really the focal point of it. They are growing, they're taking market share, but with whether it's 1 year, 10 years, but autonomous vehicles and this, almost cars as a service, these high margins.
It's out there.
That's really what is being sold. They have much higher margins already, and then there's this promise of down the road when they fully autonomous, these tech-like margins, and so that's really the story being sold. It's not even the market share. Every time they have an earnings report, the focal point is where were the margins, and that's just not really there for the big three.
No, it's not there at all, particularly what the big three likes to make and likes to sell, and that's their higher margin vehicles, which are pickup trucks and other heavy vehicles, not selling a lot of sedans and all that type thing. And unfortunately for the big three, that seems to be where the industry is going. Electronic vehicles, smaller cars, and that's not what the big three specializes in. Listen, I get it. The UAW wants to ensure that their workers can capitalize or cash in is on as much as they can in the very limited amount of time I think that the big three might have, but there's just not the money to go around.
And it just, like you said about coming from a position of strength or a position of weakness, that's what could be kind of scary. Is do you want to take as much money and get as much money in profits out of the next couple of years? But if
you do that, the company will go under.
Yeah, and if is it worth a 35% raise for a couple years and then no job? Or so that kind of remains to be seen. And I'm sure people that are, they're probably believing that wouldn't be a possibility or an option.
Well, and they're just thinking very short-sightedly, and that's frankly most people do. When most people are living month to month or paycheck to paycheck, they're not thinking, okay, my gosh, this is what's going to happen
and
in
I'll
3
blame
years.
them.
Yeah, I can't blame them.
If you really feel like you're getting screwed by your company, if it's like, hey, why don't you're getting screwed, or you think you're getting screwed, but we want to give you a smaller raise than you think you deserve so that the company will be okay for the long term.
Well,
most people, almost rightfully so, say, I need to be okay.
I mean, as
you figure it out later.
As Steve Miller said, go on and take the money and run.
Yeah.
I think that's the case. So it's unfortunate, really, in that regard. Focusing on maybe a couple of other strikes around the world, and the first one is the NHS over there. It's Britain has long, I think, or at least the average person in Britain has long prided itself on the National Health Service and how people can go get all kinds of medical treatment for free. Never minding that the truly rich people see private doctors or come to the United States, but that's what they're talking about. And it seems as though the NHS seeing all kinds of doctors which are truly underpaid by U.S. standards, truly underpaid. I think they have a legitimate beef. Maybe more so in my estimation than the UAW here is. They have a legitimate beef because they are overworked. They haven't gotten raises in quite some time, and they're asked to do the impossible with a very limited budget. And frankly, I don't see why anyone would want to go to med school to be a doctor to go work for the NHS.
It's a real head scratcher why you would go through the rigorous, qualifications to become a doctor and the wages there when you probably could go work for a big bank or something in London.
You could go work for Glaxo and make more money.
Yeah. Especially in a city like London.
Yeah.
And so it just begs the question, who wants to be doing that? And, I learned this when I was over there a couple months ago. I talked with a few people. I asked because I knew what the NHS was. I knew kind of, what they pride themselves on. But I was shocked that every single one of them said, oh, you don't want to be on that. That's kind of like the worst case scenario. They all had private insurance. They all said it's not a good, warm and fuzzy feeling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sunak needs to figure that one out. Prime Minister Sunak he's got to figure a lot of stuff out. But he better figure that one out, because if there aren't enough doctors in the NHS, you're going to have a lot of people that aren't going to be receiving medical care, and they better figure out a long-term strategy if they want that to work, because right now it does look as though, from the outside looking in, from a foreigner's view of what goes on in the British medical system, it doesn't look like it's sustainable at its current growth rate. At the same time, an average Briton could sit there and go, well, I'll tell you, I'm taking a look at Social Security over in the United States, and that doesn't look sustainable in the long term, and they could be right as well. So that's just one of those deals that, it's a strike there. And then the last one I think we really want to talk about is the Writers Guild. And this is one for me, Sam. I sit there and I look at the NHS. I get that. I get that one. I look at the UAW, and I understand these people want to cash in as quickly as they can. But I also feel as though it's like they're eating their own leg to avoid starving to death. If you catch my drift, it doesn't make any intuitively longer term. It doesn't make as much sense to me. Then we have the Writers Guild, and this is one where this is just me, not necessarily you or anyone else at Oakworth Capital Bank. I could care less about it. I could
kind of
absolutely
enjoyed
care
the
less about
extra. I told you this morning. I've kind of enjoyed the extra Monday night football game, getting to watch both of them instead of just one that's in market.
Because when I tell you this, I mean, you and I both talked about it I think here, but certainly in person, in private. I just don't go to the movies very often. I don't consume a lot of television. I don't consume a lot of first-run shows, and it's weird the number of foreign shows that I watch. Well, I mean, why is Masterpiece Theater? Why does the BBC pump out so much quality content? Why are these shows that somehow I find myself binge watching? Well, it's not often, but I've watched a few from mainland China. Why are they interesting? Why is that wholesome entertainment, whereas the stuff that they're spoon feeding me here in the United States is anything but? So when people go on strike that are producing things that I'm not consuming anyhow, frankly, I don't care.
It kind of, I wonder if I don't know this. I wonder if they've kind of overplayed their hand a little on. I'm sure networks obviously are viewing it differently, but we've seen
certainly.
But we've seen.
Well, let's face it, that's how they sell advertising.
Yeah, but we've seen companies. It was like a one-time earnings bump, but companies like Netflix say, "Oh, we have a one-time bump in earnings because we didn't have to pay out for all of these shows this quarter."
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this starts to, change or reevaluate what some of these companies feel like they need to do, and if demand hasn't changed. I mean, personally, anecdotally, the shows I watch live sports.
Yeah.
I think this is going to shift the focus more towards, live sports versus these, again, every Monday, every once a week kind of shows that have a new episode. I think it's going to put the chips on the sports side of things. But I wonder if it changes what companies feel like they need to do and what they need to be spending and how much they need to pump things out.
It's hard to break old habits, so it's probably not the current list of CEOs that's going to sit there and say, hey, we've got a wonderful opportunity to reinvent ourselves, but it could be the next batch up after that. Now, in reading some of the list of grievances that the writers have, I get some of them. I get some of them. It's there needs to be a rewrite. They're not guaranteed any income. All that stuff on a rewrite, or not even a full rewrite on a scene rewrite. They're not guaranteed any income. They get paid based on the manuscript. Yada yada yada. I get it. But at the same time, it seems as though the U.S. is saturated with ways to entertain ourselves. This is just one of them. And truthfully, we could have no new content come out at all, and there would still be too much content for me to consume that's already out there on Netflix, on Prime, on Hulu, on all these other places. They still have so much content out there, I couldn't even begin to consume it all if I did nothing but watch television and the movies between now and my demise.
I'm with you. The show I watch the most, Seinfeld, hasn't aired in over 2 decades.
Yeah.
I don't really watch a ton of stuff that's coming out this week.
I don't even. Are there any sitcoms left on the? I
don't know. I don't watch any. The only things I watch that are a time-sensitive event are live sports. It's baseball, it's F1, and football.
Yeah, the last network sitcom that I remember watching with any sort of regularity was Modern Family, and that's been off the air. How many years now? 5?
I couldn't even tell you.
It's been off the air for a while now. Even so, that has not aged as well on reruns as Seinfeld has. Or even The Office. It's kind of one of those. I can sit there and I can watch the Andy Griffith Show over and over again. However, there's nothing out there compelling me to watch whatever the networks are putting together because let's face it, we've talked about it.
The quantity over quality.
Well, it's quantity and quantity. How many CSI shows are there? At some point it's going to be CSI Montgomery. Or CSI Jackson, CSI.
They have New Orleans, don't they?
Well, they do. New Orleans in this big place. It's 1.3
New
million
Orleans,
people.
Miami, New York, Vegas.
L.A. CSI Macon, Georgia. It's out there. Just trust me. Just give it enough years, and all the shows are the same, and they're all kind of derivative of one another. And so when these people go on strike that are producing this stuff that I don't consume, I don't care.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's still a lot of money that's being represented, but I'm not sure if Americans have as strong a feeling about the Writers Guild strike as they might with the UAW. Because in the UAW, people are going to take sides of it. It's labor versus big bad businesses. Yeah. With the Writers Guild, outside of Hollywood probably, and outside of New York, in the flyover, no one cares.
And that's where I go back to did they overplay their cards a little? Because you're again, I'm using anecdotal evidence, but the people I know, I've heard some people, we don't talk about the auto worker strike every day, but
no, I mean, that's not cocktail party conversation,
no,
but you can ask.
That's relevant.
Yeah,
It's everyone
you talk to 10 people in the office, and 7 will have an opinion, and they'll tell you.
I think people have gotten over the Writers Guild, and I think part of it is there's people associate it with the very high end stars of it. Which most people, frankly, don't really feel bad for.
No.
And it's, I guess, a little bit of a misunderstanding of what the strike is actually about. But nonetheless, people seem to not care.
Listen, when you have your A-lister who's locking arms in solidarity, it very quickly becomes about them and not necessarily the writer that got screwed on a manuscript and has a legitimate beef.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's part of the problem with all this star power. Get out of the way. Let the workers strike. Let the average person see the average writer, and then all of a sudden it's not about Tom Hanks. Right. It's not about George Clooney or someone else.
Yeah.
And
so it's that's what people see too. If you go on any news organization and see an article, the front page picture most likely is some celebrity with his picket.
Yeah, picket, and it engenders zero sympathy.
Yeah.
But if you show a picture of some auto worker in Flint, Michigan, eating a mayonnaise sandwich with a snot-faced kid, all of a sudden that hits a little bit closer to home.
It's not the Shelbys with picketing with the Ford workers.
No, it's absolutely not. So, guys, I'm not sure how much we accomplished here today, but we have talked about a number of very visible strikes around the world, and this doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon. It does seem as though our societies, and at least in the Western world, are very heck-bent. I guess, boy, I almost said it, didn't I? Heck-bent on really trying to divide people based on socioeconomic levels or demographics or what have you, as opposed to really kind of teaching people we're all in this together and we all put our pants on one leg at a time, no matter who we are, and let's try to figure out a way to work with one another and let's crush this thing. Unfortunately, that's not the message that's coming out, either in our public leaders or our private leaders, unfortunately. So do what you can in order to maybe right the ship a little bit. It's going to take a grassroots movement in order to affect some real change here. With that being said, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, you can always go to oakworth.com. Go to the Thought Leadership tab, take a look at that, and we'll find links to previous podcasts, links to previous blog posts, also known as Common Sense, and also links to our monthly quarterly magazine, which is Macro Market, and I was doing so well. Macro Market and all other kinds of exciting information. All right, with that, Sam, you got anything else to say on this topic?
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.